Good morning. You're listening to WPBM LP in Asheville, North Carolina, 103.7 on your dial. This is the BLAINESWORLD show, and we're heard each Wednesday at 9 a.m., and you can also watch us on WPBM's Facebook page. I'm your host, Blaine Greenfield, and I'm here in my Zoom studio in lovely downtown Fairview, North Carolina. Each week we focus on the Asheville theater scene, as well as on positive news and information about people and organizations in both Western North Carolina and throughout the country. And to that end, it's my pleasure to introduce my first guest, and he is Michael Kotzen. Is that how you pronounce it, Michael?
Yep, exactly. Thank
Yeah,
you.
great. And what you can do, Michael, you can wave to all your friends in Facebook world. So if you're watching, you can see Michael. And I should mention that in terms of background, Michael heads a Asheville-based company. He's a producer, multi-instrumentalist, and he showcases his musical influences and unique sounds as Metro Rock. Having grown up listening to a wide variety of musical genres and playing guitar and piano for over 20 years, he started Metro Rock as an outlet to produce music that makes people dance, feel positive, and spread good vibes. He rooted with a deep appreciation for house, reggae, disco, hip-hop, rock and roll, and funk. That's some combination there, Michael. Combined with an
Yep.
endless curiosity, I guess, and to digging and B-side listening. I love that. Metro Rock releases tracks, beats, DJ sets, and live band shows, providing big sounds, fat bass, and fun grooves. And the question, Michael, I always ask when I meet somebody for the first time, or at least interview them on the show, is as a kid, were you always into music?
Oh yeah. Thank you for first of all, thank you for having me, Blaine. I'm really happy to be here. And yeah, growing up, I was really into music always. I remember listening to my parents' records when I was young. My first tape. I remember my first time going to Tower Records in the early '90s. Picked up like Guns N' Roses, Use Your Illusion 1 and 2, Michael Jackson, Dangerous. Um, I was into like Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, and then later on, music was always a thread through my life. Playing piano, and then later starting the guitar. When I started playing guitar is when I got really serious about it.
Now, as a kid, so you played various instruments. Were you into various bands also?
Yeah, I loved a big spectrum of music. Like you were saying in the intro about how I have a lot of different influences. Growing up, I'd say I was much more into a variety of mainstream artists, like ranging from like Bob Marley to Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg to some like hard rock and alternative rock in the mid '90s, and then a band that really blew my mind wide open when I was like around 15 years old was a band called Fish,
Sure.
spelled Phish for everybody. Most people in Asheville know who they are, but if, for people around the world who may or may not know them, that their musical wizardry really opened my mind to a whole new way of not only just like listening to music, but an approach to playing music, as well as opening the door for me to other artists. Like, through them, I was able to find bands like the Talking Heads or King Sunny Ade and like in Africa, or the Who or Velvet Underground, or the Roll. Well, I mean, I already knew the Rolling Stones, but a lot of these bands that Fish would incorporate into their music, they really helped open me up to a whole new world of music.
Now, as a kid, were you also into bands? Did you have your own band ever?
It's sort of interesting. I didn't really have my own band. I started playing guitar seriously at 17, and I was like in and out of bands through college and after college into my mid 20s. And I never really stuck with a band. I think part of that is because I'm a little bit of an alpha male. And I think there was a little bit of headbutting with some other alpha males in certain bands I was in, which is totally fine. That happens all the time. You sort of have to have the magic sauce when it comes to putting a band together. But that ultimately led me to taking the solo producer route, which I could go down that story, that path, if you want me to a little
But I
bit.
was just going to ask you, so Metro Rock, when did you come up with the idea to start this, your own company with as Metro Rock?
Yeah, so after a while of like bands not 100% working out, but still wanting to play music. And by the way, like growing up, I was like brought up in like the kind of like the mindset and with the, my parents always being like, all right, you got to get a job and like going to school for business. And music was always like everything in my soul and my being that I always felt. But I always thought like I wasn't, I had to get like a job that like was like kind of part of the pre-construction of like society. You know what I mean?
Right, sure.
And I wasn't Eddie Vedder, or I wasn't, it's just like, especially growing up in the 90s, like there, it's sort of like the Wizard of Oz, like what's going on behind the curtain there. And I never even understood about it. Like, I put a CD in my car and I never understood like what went into it. Like, how did they record it? Where did they record it? How did it get, mixed and mastered? Who did those things? And like slowly but surely, as I got older, those things started breaking down and I started understanding it more and I started reading magazines more. And as the internet became faster and more readily available with information, I started understanding more. But the biggest pivot for me, for sure, was in 2010. I had a friend from college who started producing on his own. His band is called Stick Figure. For people out there, they may or may not know him. He's in like the Cali roots reggae scene, extremely talented musician named Scott Woodruff. And we both went to Champlain College in Burlington together. I used to see him all the time at like parties and stuff. And I knew he was making music in like 06, 07, 08, independently by basically playing different instruments and stacking layers. And what ended up happening was like the Facebook generation, we got a little bit older and Facebook got a little more wide open and communication. And I started kind of like communicating with more and more people from college. They would be like, oh yeah. And I remember Scott went to California and was still creating music. And they were like, oh, you got to hear Scott's music. It's pretty incredible what he's doing out there. And I had heard from a friend that he was basically taking every instrument and layering it. And which essentially is, what like Dr. Dre did back in, which is like what every producer does since the beginning of time. That's essentially what production is, but he was doing it himself. And I remember listening to an album he put out in late 09, I remember, and it was called Smokestack. And I heard it and I was like, wow, this is just the most amazing thing. I've like, it was one of the most amazing albums I've ever heard to this day. And the fact that he had like done it himself at his home studio, kind of based around equipment that you could essentially purchase at Guitar Center. You know what I mean? So it was like all of a sudden the Wizard of Oz, like I was saying, suddenly that curtain was being opened to me. And I was like, well, wait a minute. And I wasn't comparing myself to him by any means. And I certainly still do not. But at the same time, I was like, it kind of lit that fuse like, okay, there's a possibility here that there's something that I can do independently while still creating music.
Two questions, if I may. So you mentioned went to college. What was your major in college?
Yeah, so it was business and hospitality management, and part of that was because I was really interested in setting up events, and like my original goal was to produce like big concerts after I went to like a slew of music festivals and live events growing up. In my formative years, I was so enthralled by like the euphoria of the music festival that I was like, I'm going to throw one of these. Like this was going to be my foot in the door of the music industry.
And you grew up where?
The Boston area, a town called Needham, Massachusetts.
And so also you mentioned before about your folks, what kind of music were they into?
Yeah, so kind of like, like your generation's
Right.
music, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, Bob Marley.
Or my favorite, arguably the greatest group of all time, of course, the Turtles. So I don't know if they were into the Turtles. Do you remember the Turtles?
I mean, I know the name. I have my dad's record, his vinyl collection that he handed down to me. I'll have to double check tonight to see if there are any Turtles in there.
The Turtles' "Happy Together" is their one classic song. But anyway, so you have this whole collection of vinyl. That's interesting, and vinyl supposedly making a comeback. It's it's kind of cool to listen to. So you had this idea then, I guess it was an evolving idea, and how did it eventually become Metro?
Well, it became this thing over. I mean, it's still becoming this thing, and it became this thing over the past decade. And I always tell people who ask me, it's like parallel parking a cruise ship. That's how I feel. And the great thing now, though, is that I really feel like a lot of things that I've dedicated the last decade to are starting to lock in, because you got to keep in mind, like, or anybody listening, that for arguably the first 8 of the last 10 years, or the first 7 of the last 10 years, it was very like part-time. It was very like, okay, now I need to like learn how to produce music, which is like, it's difficult. I mean, no matter what anybody says, it's not easy, and you have to learn the technology. You have to, and you have to be a good musician. You know, you have to understand music, and you have to have a passion for it, you know, and you have to create your own sound, which I really feel like I'm honing in on my sound. I can hear it in my music that I've released, and I can hear it in the music that I haven't released, that's yet to be released, and that I have like a ton of music in the vault that'll be coming out throughout the year. But the this is sort of a long-winded response, but I'd say the catalyst of what prompted me to start going full steam ahead was, you know, I started to get okay at it, pretty good at it, right? Enough that like my friends and some family would be like, dude, you're good. And then, but the real key is when strangers start telling you, you know, you're good at something. That's sort of like a big red flag. And then when you start feeling like you're good, that's to me the biggest thing. You know, there came a point in like 18 or 19, 2018 or 2019, that I started to feel like I was getting great at my craft. And, you know, that type of feeling, you know, can't be beat. So that's a really big catalyst. And then I started doing exercises and practicing and you know, started dedicating more of my life to it. It's like the better I got, it's like the better I get, like the more I put into it. And it's sort of like that Arnold Schwarzenegger quote. I can't really say it here because it's kind of X-rated, but Arnold Schwarzenegger has this famous quote where he's in his famous movie Pumping Iron, and he's like, when I do more reps, it's like, you know, it's like I feel so much better about myself. Like he says it in like an X-rated way, but I'll just say like, I feel so much better about myself when I'm doing these reps, you know, and my muscles are getting bigger and the girls are all looking at me and da 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 da. And like that's like how I feel with like my music. You know, the more you put into it, the more you get out.
That was a pretty good job of cleaning it up. So good job. You know, I think you get the idea. But let me ask you, Michael, because you're talking about this, I'm kind of fascinated by it. You call it your music. So what exactly is your music? And now I'm going to ask you to give a sample of it in just a second. But like, so I kind of get it. You started Metro Rock, and it's an evolving process. And now Metro Rock, you put out your own music, I guess. Is that one way to describe it? You have music that you put out?
Right. Yeah. So I have some songs that I've put out, and I have some music that a lot of music I'm going to be putting out throughout this year to really develop my name and my sound. And I've also produced for other artists. I did a lot of mixing for other artists for a few years as like sort of work for hire while I was putting in my chopping up, you know, getting in my chops. And I've networked, and now I'm working with some local artists here in Asheville, making some music. My friend Jordan Horde, The Horde, Jordan and I, that's his artist name, is The Horde. We're putting out an EP next month. I have a group of artists that I'm working with that are out in Lagos, Nigeria, that I connected with through Instagram. We're putting projects out left and right, and we have a really exciting year ahead. There's 3 artists there, or actually 4, that we've got a bunch of stuff that we've created and put out, and even more so that's coming out. So that's what's happening.
Describe 2 things, Michael. First of all, you mentioned your music. So if you would how would you describe your music?
Yeah, so my music is definitely a combination of everything I love. You know, I sort of put all the you know, the like the reggae, the hip hop. You could even say a touch of like Afro beats, drumming. I love the African drumming is a big influence of mine, and you know, the rock and roll. And obviously, I was brought up, like I was saying, Fish was my favorite band. Brought up, and I play a ton of guitar. So obviously, having a guitar solo in a song is important to me. But yeah, it's like a blend. You know, I feel like it's just sort of naturally, my music has become like a cocktail of everything I love. And you know, I think that it will work itself out more and more over time. However, you know, my influences definitely got me to where I am today, and I think you can hear that in my music.
Well, Michael, let me ask you, or kind of put you on the spot here. I think you said there is a YouTube clip you can show, and if we see the YouTube clip, and people listening on the radio can listen to it, obviously, will that give us a feel for what your music is all about?
Yeah, this next song I'm going to play is called Peace. I'm really proud of it, and it was a song that came out over summer of 21 with two artists that I'm working with, and we're all developing together out in Lagos, Nigeria. One artist name's Lanky. Shout out to Lanky, and shout out to Shima. Really, Shima's a beautiful singer, female singer, and Lanky is, you know, he's a artist based out of Lagos, Nigeria, who's on the rise. So yeah, let me set this up real quick. Cheers.
Okay, as Michael's setting this up, I should just remind our listeners that we're doing an interview here with Michael Kotzen, and he's going to be showing us, hopefully in just a little bit, one clip of some of the stuff he's done. So here it is, and people obviously on the radio can't see it, but you'll be able to hear it hopefully in just a second. And this is his piece. It's his official lyric video. We'll see if we can get it going. I think we can. We're making progress.
Can you see it okay?
Yeah, I can see it fine.
Blaine?
Yeah, that's great.
Perfect.
Let's
do it.
Okay. Good. Sounds good. I just lost the video. There we go. Okay.
Only flex, and every day will be a holiday. I'm putting me first. I need some peace. I need some peace. I need some peace. I need some, oh, some. I need some peace. I need some peace, some peace.
No one go fit to give you peace unless you give yourself. Forget about what people say, just be yourself. And if I come another life, I go pick myself. You can't find peace unless you find yourself. All I want is what I work for. I take flight, they want my fault. Why? I wanna live and die and I can't. Bust the speakers when I push my mic on. Then I'll be at peace, stand at ease. This will be my story, my history. I need some peace. Oh, I need some peace. Oh, I need some peace.
I need some peace. I need some, oh,
Very nice.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay, Michael, come on back. Okay. So let me ask you, for the benefit of the people who couldn't see it, what was the very interesting, I guess, graphics or visual there? What were people watching, and describe how that came about?
Yeah, that was just a lyric video that I had a local graphic designer put together. Just has the message of the song, and so people uh, can see the interpretation and see the positive message.
No, they did a nice job with it. The Now your role in this was that this was the group in Nigeria we just heard.
Yeah, so these are two of the four artists that I'm working with right now, based out of Lagos, and yeah, we're all working together as a team. Part of the really cool and fun process is how amazing technology is, and that we communicate just the same as like you and me. Like you were saying, you're in Fairview, I'm in Fairview. It's like it doesn't matter if we're both in Fairview or they're in Lagos, Nigeria. We still hang out on WhatsApp. We still hang out on IG chat, and we video conference. We can FaceTime anytime. It's crazy. And so we like crazy in a good way. And so we share files on Dropbox, and we create songs together, and through utilizing these technologies, it's really cool.
Well, it's funny because it has me thinking that pandemic was obviously tough for everybody, but in some respects, you guys were ahead of the curve in that a lot of stuff you were doing was not involved in person. Almost everything you were doing, you could have done with the pandemic or not with the pandemic. It's just kind of interesting you were able to put this together for that time.
Yeah, and the pandemic was certainly me and Lonky's like my guy. He's like the one who he heard some of my beats online back in December 2020, and he hit me up on Instagram and was like, yo, I like your beats, man. They're really sick. Like we should work. And I was like, yeah, like why not? Like let's try it. And obviously this is pre-vaccine. I'm still like locked up in the house working, So I'm not going anywhere. I'm like, yeah, let's make some beats. Let's see how, I was optimistic, and I'm glad I was. And we've put out 3 songs since then. Need Your Love, Peace, and the song that's right behind me here, Sierra, we just put out last week, which is another beautiful song. And the way that we do it, and the way that I do it with some of these other artists, is that I'll create instrumentals, right? And I'll send it to them, and they'll be like, oh, I love it. You know what I'm saying? And then they'll write to it, and they'll record the vocals, and then they have a great job. And one of the producers who they work with, Leo Pink, he's a guy over there. He does a great job cutting the vocals. And then they'll send me back the vocals, and I'll give them like carte blanche to like say what they want, because they got positive messages, great things to say. Like you saw in that song Peace, like they wrote Peace. Like I wrote the instrumental, they wrote the lyrics. We're like 50-50 collaborators on all this. And like it's really cool because then they'll send me back the vocals, I'll mix it together, and then I'll send it back to them, and like, we'll just be like, all right, if there's like little tweaks here and there, we'll iron those out. But it's a really cool symbiotic relationship.
Now, what's interesting about this relationship, as describing it, is that moving forward, you'll probably continue operating the same way. In other words, people won't have to come to meet you in Asheville, or you don't have to go to Nigeria. You'll be able to keep producing music the same way?
Right, absolutely. I will say though that there's a huge advantage to being in the same room and like vibing together. That's like unbeatable. My goal, me and Lonky have already talked about like getting together and making a lot of music. Because there's some, like, not to get into too many details about like the nitty gritty of like how we work, but like it would be so much better if we could lock in together for like a week in a room and just like bang out a ton of work. But the journey continues, and someday we will get together and do that. I know that for sure. And in the meantime, it leaves me room to work on independent Metro rock projects, and also to work on projects with other artists as well.
And talk about the process you're going through, which I also think is kind of neat in that you're now, what, how old are you now?
So I'm 30. I just turned 38 yesterday.
Oh,
And in fact, let me say this real quick, Blaine, real quick. You are the first person to wish me happy birthday on Facebook every single year. Every single year since we met, you are the first one. So
we won't share the secret, but anyway, I'm glad I was. So
I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
But at the age of 38, even I guess with your folks, is this kind of old to be getting into this whole music business? I guess some people have started when they were just kids. You're really now getting serious the last 10 years and certainly the last year or two. How did that affect, your success in this field?
Right. So I appreciate that question. And the bottom line is I've never felt better and more confident. I don't think I could do what I'm doing now or what I'm about to do and what I'm about to show the world I'm about to do or show myself I'm about to do. And what if I had done it any earlier, sometimes things take a process and like you can't, as much as sometimes, trust me, I have those days where I want to rush that process. I can't rush that process. And just to kind of like link it back to what we were, just to run it back about the pandemic and what you were saying there real quick. I'd say like right prior to the pandemic is when I started to really kind of accelerate things with Metro Rock. And I had and have another career that, I've balanced with Metro Rock that as the years go on. So by the way, that's real estate sales. So as the years have gone on, my real estate sales and my music, it's gone like this, right? So like I've taken my foot off the gas with real estate, put the foot on with music. And the really cool thing is that I've learned the music business inside out and how to, there's a lot of great ways to make a great living as an independent artist in the music industry. And with my experience in the real estate industry, I think that helped kind of like plant business seeds for me to like understand the business side, because even when you become an amazing musician or an amazing producer, you got to become an amazing business person. Sure. That's what you have to. It's a 50-50. There's no other balance. I mean, unless you're such a great musician that, at some point you can hire the business people to run the business. But at the beginning, always to accelerate, you got to be good at both. So, yeah.
No, it's funny you say that, because one of the things I say to a lot of people, and you're kind of a great example of it, I tell people, if you don't toot your own horn, somebody else will use it as a spittoon, and it's the point you're kind of making that you have to kind of get out to do it. And if you don't do it, nobody else is going to do it, and so you're certainly an example of that. And let me ask you, Michael, two final questions. One is, in 30 seconds, if you can, where do you see this going from here? Not the real estate part, but the music part.
Yeah, because thank you for saying that, because the music is where I'm headed. And I have massive goals, to be on similar levels as my heroes. When I think of myself and the music I'm creating now and the music I have on my hard drive that I haven't released yet, in my stick-to-itness, in my business acumen, I see myself getting up there with guys like Dr. Dre and Kanye West and DJ Khaled. I really feel that way. But I also know that it's going to take more time and more hard work, and I'm ready to put in the reps. So
yeah, except
I'm excited for the
one thing about all the names you mentioned, though, that you have over them is they haven't been on the Blaine's World show. So
yes, sir.
And they won't be in Blaine's World, the blog. So you're ahead of them, Michael. And the last question, if I can ask you, my friend, is how do people get in touch with you or find out more about what you're doing?
Thanks so much. Yeah, so my official website is metrorockmusic.com. And through that website, you can also find me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok at Metro Rock Music. Through my website, you can find my Spotify. You can find me Metro Rock on Spotify, Metro Rock, SoundCloud, YouTube, all the streaming platforms. Thank you.
And one last time, the website was what?
metrorockmusic.com.
Okay, I'd like to thank you, Michael, for being my guest this first half hour on the Blaine's World show. We've kind of known each other through Facebook and other kinds of ways over the years, but it's a real pleasure to finally at least see you. Maybe someday I'll even meet you again. Be well.
It was
Okay.
really great. Thank you so much, Blaine.
Okay, as Michael kind of works his way out of the studio, I'll see if I can have my next guest join us. And I think he's waiting for. There he is. Hey, Nick. Before I introduce you, Nick, let me just mention that you folks are listening to WPVM 103.7 on your dial, and WPVM's mission is to foster community through programming that cultivates dialogue to inform and entertain. The station provides the medium for artists, businesses, community leaders, and nonprofits to share their voice on live radio. Listeners are invited to help support WPVM's efforts by making a tax-deductible contribution. They can do so by going to the website wpvmfm.org and looking at the donate option on the upper right-hand side. It's next my pleasure to introduce my second guest, and he is Nick. Is it Honerkamp? Is that it?
Yes, sir. Very good.
Honerkamp, okay. And Nick is, let me see if I get the title, Church Development Director with ABCCM, Asheville Buncombe Community Christian Ministry. And Nick, before we begin, you can wave to all your friends and fans in Facebook world. Okay, so if they're watching, Nick is there. And what's kind of neat is that this is now the first time Nick's been on Facebook Live. So welcome aboard. And
Thanks,
also
sir.
first time you've been on the BLAINESWORLD show. So that's a double blessing for us. So thank you for joining us. Nick has kind of an interesting background. And he was telling me off the air that he'd been, at one time, you were in the Marines, I think you said?
That's
Marine.
correct.
And then he pastored, this is kind of neat, for 23 years in Haywood County. He is very involved in starting a homeless shelter there. But then he was just recently, I guess, from the last year, hired to work with Buncombe County churches to help find mission opportunities that fit their unique congregations. And the first question I asked Nick when I meet a guest for the first time is, you grew up where?
I grew up actually in Haywood County.
Oh, you did grow up in Haywood County.
Yes.
So when you were growing up as a kid in Haywood County, did you always know you wanted to be in the ministry?
No, I did not. And first of all, let me say thank you for having me on your program. It's a true privilege and an honor. I moved from St. Charles, Missouri when I was 11 years old. So when I say Warsh, I put an R in there. I call my Christians do. So if somebody's sitting out there going, he's not from Haywood County, he says Warsh. So no, I moved here when I was 11, but I spent most of my life here, except for when I went into the Marine Corps after I finished high school, and love the mountains, love the mountain people, and really enjoy it. But no, I did not know at that time I was going to be a minister. That came later in my life. And probably after the Marine Corps is when I really started embracing the fact that I really want to be invested in people's daily lives. So that's probably when I started pursuing getting into the ministry.
So then you went to school for that?
Yes, sir. Went to school, got a 4-year degree on that, and then really did a lot of hands-on training with my local church. The best way to learn how to do stuff is
Sure.
go to the hospital and be told, don't sit on their bed. They're trying to eat and can't stay too long. There's all kinds of things that an older pastor can teach you. But more than anything, it's really just getting into the lives of people and learning how to do those things.
Okay. And so then in Haywood, I guess it was in Haywood County, you were a minister at a church?
Yes, sir. I was a youth pastor, and then I became a business administrator, then became the executive pastor, ended up taking over that church. In the last 17 years, I was a senior pastor of that church, very involved in our community. I thought the job of the local church, true success is what happened outside the walls. How did you impact the community? If your church disappeared, would anybody even care? And so I was very engaged and got my congregation very involved in serving in our local community.
And so that must have been quite a shift, though, from working with an individual church to all of a sudden then becoming involved with Asheville Buncombe County Christian Ministry, one of the outstanding groups in Buncombe County. How did you come to get involved with this group?
Well, that's the key right there, is that Haywood County, we did not have a homeless shelter in 2008, and so we really felt the need to start a homeless shelter. We did that in our parsonage of our church with the help of several other churches. Immediately needed to move it off our property so that it was on neutral ground. We moved it off the property, and today there's a homeless shelter in Waynesville, Haywood Pathway Center, that was started 14 years ago. And it was working with different denominations, Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterian, and learning how to negotiate a community event. I think the hardest leadership there is community leadership. Nobody elects you. Nobody pays you. You don't have a title. It's all by influence. Will people work with you? And so ABCCM's executive director, Scott Rogers, saw me doing that in Haywood County and said, hey, can you come over to Buncombe County and work with all these diverse churches and work together to bring them all together to be able to do the beautiful things we need to do for this community? And that happened in the middle of 2020 of all times.
And talk about, and for the folks who don't know ABCCM, what the group is.
ABCCM is a Christian nonprofit. It's the biggest and oldest in Buncombe County. It's been around for 52 years. We actually have 6 ministries, and within those ministries, we have a crisis ministry where we help people pay their rent, pay utilities. We help with food and clothing. We have several homeless shelters for veterans, for women with children, the only free medical clinic in Asheville. And so we're very involved in helping our neighbors who are in crisis.
Okay, and talk about then your role specifically with the organization.
Well, originally ABCCM was founded. Our charter is we are owned by the member churches of Buncombe County. So there's 300 plus churches in Buncombe County that actually own this ministry, and we represent them. We believe we can do more together, in a collaboration than we can individually. So we try to provide that 501c for any church that wants to come together with other churches to do some kind of ministry. And so because of that, I speak at a lot of churches. I understand pastors, and it gives me an opportunity to look for unique opportunities for each congregation to be involved in practical ways in serving outside the walls of their congregation.
For example,
we might have someone who says, we're a small congregation, we can't do much. Is there an opportunity for us? And right now we're running our Safe and Warm campaign, which will last until the end of February. And so we say, yes, if you would like to collect coats and blankets and scarves, any amount will help. Or if you want to collect a little money to help with a heating oil bill. And so it's my job to know each of these congregations differently in the things they enjoy doing. Some congregations like to cook, others like to help in a practical way. My job is to feed them opportunities, to express the love of Christ in a practical way to their neighbors.
I assume there'll never be a shortage of opportunities to do this. You always have stuff to be.
Well, actually, Jesus himself said, "Japor will be with you always." So we understand that that's part of our climate. And by the way, I want to say this. Even though we're a Christian organization, there are many people that are not of any faith tradition that we want to help. We believe there's room for every single citizen in Buncombe County to get involved in serving our neighbors in crisis. We just provide that leadership or some guidance, pull together the churches for some seed money, but we make room for anyone that wants to serve to come serve. We do not restrict anyone that we do serve, nor anyone that we want to serve.
And you raised a good point there, Nick, because I think that's how I first became involved a little bit with ABCCM, is that I'm not Christian, but I volunteered to help out. What was it? The Christmas pageant used to have.
Turn to Bethlehem. Yep.
Right. But what an experience. And they didn't ask me my religion. They didn't ask me how I felt about Christ or whatever. They just welcomed the whole community. And it was such a great experience. I think you told me, unfortunately, off the air, that's been on hiatus, I guess, for a couple of years, right? Because of the pandemic.
Yeah, Return to Bethlehem is a live in-person event, and you have to take an elevator, a small elevator, to get to the location. And with COVID and protocol, it's just one of the events that we're not able to do until we see COVID-19 become less of a deterrent in our community from in-person gatherings.
But hopefully that'll come back. It's just
we intend to as soon as we can do fully in-person, events.
But back to your point, and it was such a good one, that you do such great work for the community, the ABCCM, and you welcome everybody. So talk a little bit more about then what happens in the Safe and Warm campaign. And is this needed in this winter, any winter? What is it?
Yeah, there's 2 different parts of the Safe and Warm campaign. Since our very beginning in 1969, we have always had a heating assistance program, but it was primarily for families with small children, the elderly, and veterans. About 5 years ago, we rebranded as Safe and Warm because we really wanted to include those who are dealing with homelessness. And so there's 2 parts of this campaign. The first is we're trying to raise $100,000 between now and the end of February to help 1,000 families with utility bills. We want to help families with their utility bills. That's 100 families with their utility bills. And then also we want to be able to collect about 10,000 coats So on one hand, we're collecting money that helps. It's so important right now because as temperatures are dropping, heating prices are rising. The national average for heating price increase in 2021 was 59% from January to February, 59% increase. So it's becoming harder and harder to stay warm. So we need to raise money so that we can help these families that are in crisis. And one of the things that's interesting about our ministry is usually when someone gets to us, they have already exhausted all the resources. They're within 5 days of a cutoff. So that's the one part of Safe and Warm. The other part of Safe and Warm is the winter coats, blankets, scarves, gloves, hats, those kind of drives. We have 24 locations around Buncombe County where we're collecting those and bringing them in, hoping to give out over 10,000 coats during this winter. And then also when it goes to Code Purple is when it drops below 30 degrees in Asheville. We actually have teams that go out on the streets taking blankets to those who are dealing with homelessness to make sure that they're not freezing to death on the sidewalks if they're not in one of our shelters.
Now, if somebody wants to participate in the drive, for example, for the coats, for the
Sure.
blankets, what do they do?
The easiest thing to do is go to abccm.org/safe and warm. On that website, you can either donate money or you can find a location where you could drop off a new or lightly used blanket or coat or hat or scarf. And we would be glad to collect those and then take them to our crisis ministry where we can get them out to other people.
Now, Nick, talk to me a little bit about if people encounter homeless folks, not even from a religious standpoint, just maybe a decency standpoint. What should people do? In other words, if they see somebody on the street that's suffering or homeless, what's the best way to handle that?
Well, first of all, we have to realize that there are several different classifications of homelessness. My boss was talking the other day about 7 different types of homeless. And so understanding that when you're looking at someone dealing with homelessness, first of all, they're a person who's dealing with a situation called homelessness. And there are a group that are dealing with mental health issues, substance abuse issues. And so therefore, you do need to make sure that you're safe and that you protect yourself and you're careful. But the number one thing I found with our homeless population, I was walking by a bench one day and I was in a hurry, and there was a gentleman that was homeless on the bench. And he said, hello. And I said, hey, how are you doing today? And he says, thank you for seeing me. Thank you for stopping and talking to me and just acknowledging that I'm a human. I said, I am sorry. I was in a hurry. I was rushing by, but you are important. And I think that most folks want to be seen and that they have some value, and they're not just here to get a handout, but they have something to contribute if we can figure out how to do that. Can I give you a good example of that?
Yeah, please.
A week ago, we had a foot of snow. Well,
Right.
The next morning, I showed up at our crisis ministry, and it looked like a grenade had gone off. There were 4 tents, sleeping bags, this huge 20-foot radius fire pit thing in the middle of the sidewalk right in front of our front door. It was a disaster. And I was really just like, wow, somebody really destroyed this place last night. Somebody was sleeping in the porta-john outside. It was just a really bad situation. And as I'm sitting there calling the crisis manager and our crisis coordinator about, we're going to have to clean all this up to open our doors this morning to be able to help people, a woman came up with a garbage can and a snow shovel and started cleaning everything up. And I went up to her and I said, excuse me, ma'am. I said, what are you doing? And she says, I'm cleaning up this mess. I said, well, that's very kind of you. She said, well, I made the mess last night, so the least I could do is clean it up. I said, you made all this last night? She said, it was so cold, I thought I would die. I had to start a fire. I didn't mean to cause any problems, but I just was trying to stay alive. And the fire department got called. The police department got called. They've been dispersed. But she came back the next day and cleaned everything up by herself, and it looked as good as new when she was done. And these folks are struggling for food, and they're struggling to stay alive, and yet they're doing what they have to do. But she came back the next day and cleaned everything up and apologized.
I'm going to chill just to tell that story. It's just an amazing story, but it also points out, Nick, the problem we have in Asheville, I have it, I guess, in the country too, that there are X number of people who need help, and everybody kind of acknowledges it, but too many people, as you said, almost just walk on by. It's like I was reading, you've been reading about it, the homeless camps, who would have thunk in Asheville in
Yeah,
2022.
right.
And so people say, well, that's terrible. But even worse is the fact that, well, if you don't have a homeless camp, where are people supposed to go or hang out? I guess there are no simple solutions to this, so.
Yeah, I think it's one of the most complicated situations we're dealing with in America, and there's a lot of different strategies that are being uh, test drove, like having a legal tent city, and then others are saying no homeless whatsoever. If we
Right.
drop them all out, they'll all leave and go somewhere else. And I think every community needs a unique solution, which involves government, business, nonprofits. It's going to involve all of us coming up with a solution. And that's one of the things you'll never hear me complain about another organization that's trying to deal with homelessness, but's doing it different than we're doing it, because we need every solution we can find. We need every partner we can find. And maybe I'm called to do it one way and you're called to do it another way. And as long as we're both relieving homelessness, I'm all for that.
Well, the problem, I guess, too, is what is it, NIMBY, the not in my
Yep.
backyard
Yep.
concept. Because one of the nonprofits, Homeward Bound, I think it was, had a great idea. You had a deserted hotel, and you were going to make that a place for, homeless folks. Yet many people in the community didn't like it. It's a great idea, but don't build it. And that's, that's a shame. So you can complain all you want, but what I like what you guys are doing is rather than just complaining, you're doing something about it. And
Right.
you're raising a really good point, I think, here, Nick, is that I guess all of us should seek to do what we can do in our own way.
Yeah, I know of people that just pack 50 sandwiches and bag lunches and just go out on one day a month and they give out sandwiches. Well, that only impacts 50 people, but to have a citizen, not an organization, a citizen care enough to go into the park and to find people to say, you matter. I want to make sure you're taken care of. It says a lot to those 50 people. And so I think that all of us can do a little. And if we all do a little, it'll be enough.
Well, it's funny you said that because I just saw the other day, same kind of thing. I saw a woman have just one bag and she was giving it to somebody who needed food. But it was her way of making a difference, which I'll put you on the spot here a little bit and ask you about if we encounter somebody who's in need of a helping hand, be it financially or food. Is there a best way you should deal with that? Meaning, if you see somebody, do you give them food? Do you give them money? Do you give them accommodation? Do you not do certain things? How do you handle it, Nick?
Personally, I think that there's nothing wrong with giving a coupon to a local restaurant or giving food. I would be very cautious about giving money because you might be funding a drug addiction. And also, there is a criminal element that will prostitute our panhandlers on street corners for profit for themselves. And so if you're giving money to somebody at a stop sign, it may not be going to that person. It may be going to a crime syndicate that is dropped that person off for a 4-hour shift with a van. And that happens all around our city. And so we have to be careful about that. I'd rather invest money in organizations like Homeward Bound, like ABCCM, that are Western Carolina Rescue Mission, that are trying to come up with long-term solutions, not keeping that person at the street corner, but getting them off the street altogether. And so I think it's very appropriate to have conversation, to give a sandwich. One solution is to have a Ziploc bag with a bottle of water, maybe some hand sanitizer, and maybe a bus ticket, and hand that to someone on the corner so they can get a hot meal by getting on the bus. There's ways we can help without funding dysfunction.
And talk a little bit about then your organization. If people want to get involved in terms of having, I guess, a place to do positive work, they could come, like there's ABCCM, look for volunteers.
Oh, are you kidding? That's our secret sauce. Volunteers is our lifeblood. Honestly, when we hire an employee, we expect that they will recruit 100 volunteers to come to our ministry. So yes, we are very serious about. We have a volunteer coordinators, and their job is not to do anything except make sure that volunteers have a positive experience. So what we feel like our job is to identify specific needs, best practices, and then recruit volunteers to do things they already have in their heart to do and let them have an opportunity to come serve. So if they go to abccm.org, there are all kinds of service opportunities. We now have 6 different ministries. We literally probably have 75 to 100 different volunteer positions that need to be staffed, depending on your gifting, depending on the things that you love to do. But this ministry, we could not afford to pay enough volunteers to do the needs. To pay enough employees to do all of the tasks that need to be done to serve our neighbors in crisis. We rely on our volunteers to do that. In 2019, we had about 6,600 volunteers. 2020 knocked that down to about a third. And then last year, 2021, we saw a 33% increase in volunteers. Those volunteers are coming back as there's safety protocol, as there's vaccines, as there's boosters. But yeah, we are definitely rebuilding our volunteer base, and people are showing that they're ready to come and serve their neighbors in need.
And talk about you mentioned there are 6 different areas you can volunteer or get involved with ABCCM. So you talked about the Safe and Warm campaign. What were some of the others again?
Well, the 6 different ministries are, first of all, we have a crisis ministry, 4 different locations around our community. They all do the same thing: rental assistance, utility assistance, food, and clothing. Our second ministry is our jail ministry. We actually have chaplains and jail ministers that do Christmas presents, little shower kits, or they also teach life skills inside the jail. So we coordinate all the volunteers that go into the jail. We have a medical ministry, a free medical ministry, the only one in Asheville, that helps anyone who's insured or not underinsured or uninsured, documented or undocumented. We don't ask those questions. Somebody have a medical need. We have a full pharmacy. We have doctors. We have volunteer nurses. They'll meet with you, find out what you need, get your prescription, get you to someone that can help you. And then we also have we have 2 homeless shelters. We have one, the Veterans Restoration Quarters, which houses 150 veteran men out in East Asheville. And we just have a brand new Transformation Village, which is a homeless shelter for women with children. 50% are coming from domestic abuse, 50% are coming from drug addiction. And our last ministry is Veteran Service of Carolinas. We're in 74 counties in the state of North Carolina. We have a call center in Asheville that reaches those 74 counties. We find a veteran anywhere that either needs housing or employment. We have funds to help them be able to do that. And we're the one-stop shop when it comes to veteran services.
Well, what I'm hearing you say too, it's almost all that you do, which is kind of cool, is like a one-stop shop, meaning if somebody wants to get involved, you and I were talking about, seeing somebody's homeless or somebody's down and out having a tough time, rather than try to figure this out ourselves or what can I personally do, contact you folks and you'll put them to work.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if we find a person that's walking on the street that's dealing with homelessness, if we can get them to our crisis ministry, they would usually shed the clothes they're wearing because they've been wearing them for a week or two. We'll give them a brand new outfit, new boots, new jeans, new flannel shirt. If we've got sleeping bags or tents, we'll hand that out too. And then we'll pack them up with a bag of groceries or something and feed them and give them. So we're able to do way more because we do it together. So if we can do it together as a collaboration, we can have a lot more bang for our buck. Plus, when we help someone, we open a file and we share that database with other charitable organizations to make sure we don't have anyone milking the system. We know what assistance you got at Evelyn Foundation, one of our partners. We know what's going on, so we know whether you're using the system or you legitimately need help. And so because of that, there's accountability to our churches, our businesses, our donors, that we're not wasting resources.
Talk about the age range and who are your volunteers? Meaning, is there a certain minimum, maximum age, or how does that run?
No, there is not a minimum. A small child will usually come with their parents.
Right.
They have to come with their parents. But they can start volunteering at the age of 16 and be in our data system by themselves. We have volunteers well into their 80s that love to come in and volunteer. That great generation, that World War II generation and just beyond, continues. In fact, we had a volunteer the other day. My boss, Scott Rogers, walked in and saw a volunteer, and he said, "Why do you volunteer here?" And she says, "Because I failed at retirement. I was sitting down on the computer watching TV, playing on my phone, and I just realized I had more to do with my life than just doing that. So I came down here to volunteer." So we can take folks with disabilities, folks that have mobility issues, strength issues. I promise you, we can find a job that's meaningful for you and that you can do and serve our neighbors in need. And you'll meet some people that are fabulous that you had no idea just how brilliant they really are. They're just struggling with one portion of their life.
And talk about something else that volunteering does for folks, Nick, and that is gives them a great way to pick up some additional skills. And I'm thinking specifically, you talk about 16, 17, 18-year-old college students.
Oh, yeah.
What a great way to learn some stuff, that and put it into practice that they may have never picked up before. Yeah.
Conflict resolution, or doing an intake and really figuring out what a person needs. They might have come in for a pair of shoes, but usually they've got 3 or 4 other needs that they're not bringing to the table, so they know they can trust you. You're talking about hospitality issues. Before we allow a volunteer to serve, we make sure they have the appropriate training so they cannot fail. Remember, our organization is built upon volunteers. Therefore, our volunteers have to have a positive experience. So we make sure before we throw them into the fire, they know exactly what to expect. They've got a short little work schedule. They've been trained. And so it's really important to us to provide them with every opportunity for success. My boss says we try to remove every obstacle that would keep them from success so that they can be authentically human and just love the person in front of them.
And talk, Nick, if you would, about how different kinds of groups can get involved. So, for example, I didn't realize there were that many churches in the area that you serve. Yes. If a church wants to get, are there some churches, I guess, that are already not member churches? Are there some still out there?
Well, yeah, I'm sure there's some churches that are putting their money and their resources in other areas. But any church that wants to participate with us becomes an owner. But whether they're a church, a business, a civic group, there are several ways that they can get involved. One thing is we have cook teams because we have 2 congregant living facilities. So there have to be a breakfast, a lunch, a dinner. So sometimes a group of 8 will just come in once a month on the 3rd Thursday and they'll cook a dinner for our veterans. And that's one way they can get involved. Another thing is sometimes they'll do a once a year work day. They'll come out on a Saturday and they'll take the garden in front of Transformation Village. And they'll plant fresh flowers and they'll do the gardening and they'll weed eat and they'll do all those things and beautify our lawn. So there's ways that you can come as an individual, but there's also ways you can participate as a group. And again, if you go through abccm.org, click on serve, and we will direct them and help them figure out the right opportunity for their organization.
What if somebody doesn't know what they want to do?
I had that today. Somebody sent me an email today and said, "Look, you have so many opportunities to serve. How can I help?" And usually then I will call that person and say, because listen, if somebody wants to volunteer, we're going to call them. We're going to talk to them. We're going to find out. Tell me where you're from. What's your life experience? What are you passionate about? And from that, I just had a gentleman say, "Listen, my grandson's on the streets in a big city on the West Coast. And I can't get to him off the streets. But I can come cook a meal for our homeless here on his behalf." And so there's always a story. There's always a skill set that we need. And we work hard to make sure that what you do is not just a job that's meaningless just to be a number. We make sure that you have a very meaningful opportunity. And if you say to us, "Listen, I don't want to be in the clothing room and sorting clothes. I want to meet someone," we'll put you on the front line. We'll let you meet our guests, our clients, and we'll let you interact with them. So lots of opportunities.
Nick, one more time, if folks want to get involved with Asheville, Buncombe County, Asheville, Buncombe Community Christian Ministry, best bet is to do what?
abccm.org, click on the serve button. We'll find a meaningful place for you to serve your neighbor in crisis.
Great. I'd like to thank you, Nick. Honerkamp, is that it?
Honerkamp.
Honerkamp being my guest the second half hour. Also, Michael Kotzen being my guest the first half hour. I'd like to thank Amy Prisnosh, my producer. I look forward to having you join me next Wednesday at 9 a.m. here on WPVM 103.7 in Asheville, North Carolina. You can also listen online at WPVMFM.org and watch us on WPVM's Facebook page. Nick, it's been a pleasure meeting you.
Thank you, sir.